Okay, so we have qualitative and quantitative. This is from the word quantity, which we know is when you actually count something, okay? Or it deals with a quantity, 6 versus 3. So this is from quantity, which means there are numbers involved. That's how I try to remember the qualitative versus the quantitative. Qualitative is when we're looking at words and we're trying to analyze. Okay, so they give an example in here about qualitative. If we're talking about a bookcase, there's a bookcase, right? Everybody see the bookcase? If we're talking about qualitative, one of the things would be maybe what is it made of? Because we're answering that with words, right? Is it metal? Is it plastic? Is it wood? Is it processed wood? Is it, okay, that would be a description, but it's a word descriptor. Okay, what's another qualitative thing that you might see on there? What are some other words to describe that? If you were describing that, just looking at it, no numbers, what are some other things you would specify? Yes.
Color.
Okay, it's color. Okay, so qualitative might be what it's made of. It's color. What other things? Yeah.
Could it be descriptive in detail? Like, for example, there's a sticker on the side.
Sure. So any special markings? Okay, are there some markings on it? Okay. Riley, what do you see about that? It's got a white color. What else do you see? Don't use numbers.
I guess just what's on it, like books.
Okay, what's in it? Whatever is it using to store it. It's a bookshelf. Doesn't necessarily mean we have books on it. Okay, lots of people use bookshelves to put all sorts of other things on. Okay, so what is it storing? Okay, so you can see there's a lot. Yes.
Where was it built?
Ah, yes. Where was it built? Did you look in there? She was really smart. She's looking at the notes inside. That is true. Okay, where it was built. If we knew where it was built, maybe where we purchased it. Is it an IKEA? A lot of times we describe our furniture, it's an IKEA, because that's where it was bought, which also tells us where it was built, because most of that is built in Sweden. Okay, so IKEA stuff is built in Sweden, and so that's where it comes from. Okay, so those are all descriptor words. Those would be words that you analyze it by. Okay, now think about what are some things we could describe it by using numbers. What would those be? Yes.
What its width and length is.
Okay, both the width, the length, what else? Is there a third dimension? Yes.
Maybe how many storage compartments it has, or how many things it's actually storing.
Okay, so we could look at how many items being stored.
How deep it is.
Oh, yes, the depth. That's how I spell it. There you go. And the number of compartments. For storing. That could be either the compartments, or I could call it how many shelves are there. I mean, that's another way I look at their compartments, shelves. Okay. Riley, any way else you could describe that with numbers?
Volume.
Sure, you could talk about its volume. Okay. it tells us how many square feet. And if you're comparing different bookcases, that may be an important thing, the volume, because if it's more narrow, you might not be able to get as much on there because of the volume there. Okay, and so those are things that you would look at. Okay, so those are different ways that we can look at it. So these are actually measurable or countable. Okay, so we're actually using numbers in some way. Okay, so that's kind of the difference when we're talking about what a qualitative versus a quantitative, the data part. This is the data. The data is made up of descriptions or things like that. The data, quantitative, the data is made up of numbers which represent a measurement or a count of something. Okay, so that's the difference there. Okay, now looking back at your three statements, okay, can you identify which one is a qualitative and which one is a quantitative? Or are they all quantitative? Riley, think back on your three statements that you had and put them down. Okay, yes.
Mine are all quantitative.
Yours are all quantitative. Can you tell me what yours were?
We have created over 800,000 new manufacturing jobs while I've been vice president. And that's a number, and it's closed.
Okay, yes, it is. We'll come back to the close ended. Thank you. Okay, what was your other one?
There are 20,000 earthquakes a year. It's not describing them.
No. Okay, and your last one?
About 20% of American households are one-child families.
Oh, there's my abbreviations. Okay. Okay, Abby, what are yours?
My opponent has a plan that I call the Trump sales tax, which would be a 20% tax on everyday goods that you rely on to get to the month.
Okay, so she's talking about, what would you say, is that qualitative or quantitative?
Quantitative.
It's probably quantitative because she's saying it's a 20% sales tax. Okay. She also has a little bit of qualitative in there, this Trump sales tax. She's describing it in her own words. He doesn't call it that. Okay, so that's another thing. Okay. What's one of your other ones?
Americans eat about 7 billion quarts of popcorn a year, which is enough to fill the Empire State Building 18 times.
Quarts. And then they do a comparison. Okay. Yes, that is a quantitative statement. Okay. What's your last one?
According to a 2022 YouGov poll, 10% of Americans say that chocolate is their favorite ice cream flavor.
That one's one I get so confused reading all those. Okay, that's the chocolate vanilla. One thing I don't get is when it says chocolate is 51% and vanilla is 59%. That's more than 100%.
That's what I was thinking too.
Yeah, that's kind of why, like, what? That one was, yeah, I'm not sure understanding that. Riley, what are yours?
Donald Trump states, I got more votes than any Republican in history by far. In fact, I got more votes than any sitting president in history by
So
far.
is that a qualitative or quantitative?
Probably qualitative,
Okay, why?
because he doesn't use any numbers, just using words.
Yes, he is just using words. He's saying, I think I got more than anybody. but he doesn't really give any numbers or anything like that. So he's actually doing more of a qualitative of comparing. It's a comparison qualitative because he's comparing number of votes for him to other candidates. Specifically, he says sitting presidents. Okay. Okay, so that would be more of a qualitative. Okay, what's your other one?
According to the latest market research, there are over 2.96 billion games in the world as of 2021.
What kind is that?
Quantitative.
Yeah, 2.96, is that what you said? Billion games. It actually tries to describe those games too, which I give it credit there. Okay, and your last one?
A new study has revealed the largest forest database in the world, to which they have discovered 73,300 tree species on Earth.
Okay. We tend to like to look at quantitative ones when we speak a lot, and when you go out looking for statistics, you'll find you start to tend towards quantitative because it has numbers, and we all think statistics are numbers. There is a branch of statistics that are numbers, but there's also a branch that's qualitative, which are words. Okay. Now, I will say that one of mine was probably, I did the eating cats and dogs. That was definitely a qualitative. That had no numbers, not how many. It just said we were eating cats and dogs in a specifically Springfield, Ohio. So that's quantitative. The other one was executing abortions, okay, and or executing children, okay. So that is again probably more on this because really that word execute has to do more with what does that mean. And so it's really based on the definition of that word that we're really talking about there. Okay. It could be qualitative because we're saying 0. That's a number. But it's actually saying nowhere. It doesn't say 0 have occurred. It says nowhere do they or may they. Nowhere may they. So it's not really putting a number on it. It's just saying, there's no place there is that you can do this. I could argue that's a quantitative because the answer is 0, but that's really kind of mute in some ways. And again, it goes down to what does execute children mean? Yes.
I'm just noticing like with the qualitative that it's like execute like eating, like there's verbs.
Yes.
Kind of like there's not that many verbs in the quantitative.
No, that is very true. Okay. They're more like just numbers that we're looking at. Whether those numbers are correct or not, that's a whole nother story. But yes, this is definitely on words, and it has eating or execute. It has these words that we're using, and people use them also when we interview them. Okay, so a lot of times they're specific questions that you use. Okay, so this is the data that you use in qualitative. Actually, the way you collect your material is different also between qualitative and quantitative. Okay, so let's look at that. So this is the data, how you collect it. Okay, if you want to, you can write some of this down so that you have a good idea. It's also in those pages, but you may have to search for it a little bit. I'm trying to do it with our things. Okay. Okay, so this is the difference in data. The difference in how we collect these, how we collect the data. So you have data that you collect, and so the methods of collecting how do I get the data? Okay, there's very big differences in this. Yeah, and some are alike, but. Okay, when I'm collecting qualitative data, a lot of times it's under interviews. We interview some person, okay? Usually it's an open-ended statement. Does anybody know what that means? Open-ended question, I should say. You know what an open-ended question is? Yes.
It's like an open-ended is like there's like a lot of possibilities that you can say. Like closing would be like yes or no. Is that right?
Closing could be yes or no, or like if I ask, how many siblings do you have? That's a closed-ended statement. You don't have 1 or 5. You don't have -2 or 3. You have a specific amount. An open-ended is more like, how do you feel? What have you seen? What do you think? You see what I'm saying? What do you think happens? What do you think about your siblings? That's an open-ended question because I'm asking you what you think about your siblings. That could be any sort of answer. And it's not usually going to be a number. It's going to be some sort of set of words. So it's an interview that has an open-ended question that's usually answered with words. Okay, so that's some of the ideas that we're looking at. So it's an interview. It could be a questionnaire. Questionnaire is not much different than an interview, except for it's on paper, this is in person. Okay, they can also be the same thing. They can both be things that are answered with words, and they're open-ended questions to be qualitative. Okay. Besides an interview where you ask a person and a questionnaire where you ask a person, so this is on paper. This is on talking. There's also, you can do observations. Again, this is open-ended. You're trying to answer, as I observe you in math class. How is he acting? It's an open-ended question. I'm describing what I see. Okay, this throws all sorts of different things into it because you are observing the person and trying to answer these questions. Okay, but you're not the actual person. So it can skew all sorts of things, but it's an observation. And this is what I see to these open-ended questions. So again, they're pretty much open-ended or they're answered with words. Okay, so pretty much those types of questions are asked. But we usually use interviews, which can be a direct interview of you, or it can be a direct interview of maybe somebody that else is in the room. It doesn't even have to be. Okay. Can you think of any of the statements? There was one of the statements that we looked at that had qualitative evidence. What was that qualitative evidence? Rose found it. She looked up one of the statements and found something that was qualitative. It was actually an observation. It wasn't what I see, it was what I hear. Can't think of it? What did you tell me about the evidence for cats and dogs?
About how people like their pets.
But what else did you find when you looked it up to see if it was true? You said you saw one person that had heard about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like people on the news.
Yes. So it was somebody that heard about it. They were making an observations by listening to other people. They're taking their words to an open-ended question was, well, I think they reported somebody eating a cat and dog. That's not, that's an open-ended question. Because was a cat and dog eaten? I don't know. I heard that maybe one was. That's not a real definitive answer like yes or no. That's I heard this. And so that is kind of an observation also. So those are different ways you can do quantitative. The other ways that we can do quantitative or qualitative, they go into, and this can be very interesting, they give you a whole bunch here, but we go back into articles. A lot of times we will do observations or data searches and look at different articles or databases about people, and we try to come up with things. So it's called data mining. Okay, so this is an interesting concept. There is all sorts of data out there about you. You may not know it, but there's all sorts of, they collect data on you. The way they do that is now we have store cards. So store cards look at what you buy. Okay. You have things you go look at on Google. They keep track of that. This person looks for these kind of things. Then they start looking at similarities and different. So there's what's called data mining. They're starting to look for things that are similar and see if they can make projections. How can they help you to maybe buy more of their ads or more of their materials that they sell? They're looking at what types of people go out and look for certain brands of tennis shoes. Is it middle income, upper income, lower income? Is it people that like certain sports or athletic? Do they read a lot? So they look at the different data about people and try to come up with similarities, okay? And that is done by computers. This is done by computers. To me, this is one of the scariest things that we can do. I just was listening the other day to a topic. They were telling us how much data car manufacturers are getting on you. With current stuff, they are recording where you go, how fast you drive, how often you brake, how often do you brake more quickly, what is, more slowly, how close you drive to the person in front of you, how many times you swerve, because there's data now that you can know how many times you swerve. So there's how many times you start and stop. All of those kinds, they're recording that. The weird thing is, they really don't have to tell people what they're recording. And they are selling that information to other people so that then they can start doing data mining on it and figure things out. That's scary to me because now they're keeping track of everything I do in my own vehicle. And I don't really like that. Okay? Because now it could be used against me in certain things. They may not know the circumstances, but they saw that I braked really hard. They may say, okay, you brake too hard, your insurance is going up. You follow too close, your insurance is going up. Okay? Those are the kind of things, or they can look at it as a police officer and they can say, it looks like you were swerving all over the place. They don't really know the circumstances. We need to check you out and follow you to see if you are drinking and driving. So they actually do profile you by that. And so those are things, this to me is scary, the data mining. The amount of information stores collect on you because you get a membership card. And that membership cards with key comes and they keep track now of everything you do at the store because you gave them the membership number or your phone number, which a lot of them it is. And so they know all sorts about you. Like Fred Meyer, they know what I like to buy. They send me coupons for those things I like to buy. So they have predicted what I buy now based on what my shopping patterns are. And they'll send me coupons of certain things I have bought or things they think are similar to it to get me to expand my horizons and reach out into more products that they sell. Rose.
That's interesting. Yeah, I
It's
agree with
very
you that,
interesting.
like, yeah, that they shouldn't be like storing all our information.
Yes.
But I do think like some people like they don't like phones, you know, because they keep a lot of stuff. But sometimes they can be helpful
Yes.
because like Tesla. I heard this story like as they video you in the
Yeah.
car, and the person went off a cliff, and it wasn't his fault.
Yeah.
And so they could go back in the video and check it.
Yes.
So even though it is, it's wrong. Can some good be?
Yeah. So I always look at things. Every thing comes with both good and bad. So what happens is usually things that start out for the good. Usually in technology, in new things we can do, it starts out for the good. Then there's people that want to get, how can I make money off this? How can I do things that, are not so clear cut? They're a little shady. How can I profile this person? Because if I really watch her phone, she's never home at this certain date or this certain time. Oh, that might be an opportunity for me to burglarize because I know she's gone at that time. Okay. It used to be they had to watch you to see. Now they can get it off of data and they can make these people aren't home. This series of people in this neighborhood aren't home. So we can hit these houses during that period of time and we can get the whatever we want out of them. Okay. So that's another way of keeping track of what's going on. Okay. So this data mining thing, what they do then is they just start looking for similarities. This huge pool of data, they look for similarities. And then they try to come up with correlations and all sorts of things from that. This is a huge industry right now. They are hiring lots of data researchers to do this because they're trying to get all sorts of different information, and it's being used by a whole bunch of different entities, by governments, by especially stores or manufacturers to see what kind of person they're targeting or how to sell it better, that kind of stuff, to see what typical person so they know how to make their ads speak to the people that actually buy it. Okay. And so there's all sorts of ways this is used. It's used in education. They look to see what your grades are, some characteristics about you, because that's all kept by the education department. Okay. All schools have that information on you. They have a lot about your income. They have a lot about your family circumstances. They have a lot about activities you do, activities your parents do because they have their occupations. They have all sorts of information and they can start making assumptions about you and start using that for educational research. So it's not all bad. But what happens is when you have this much data out there and people are mining it, that means looking for corollaries, I can just see bad things happening. Because people tend to go for whatever will help them make $1, or sometimes it's to do illegal activities. It's a tendency of man. We are sinful people. We tend to go for sinful things. And that's what happens even in data mining. So that to me is a big thing. Okay. Quantitative. How do I collect it? The methods of collecting it. You can do interviews. Again, you can do, observations, questionnaires. And these again, in this one, instead of open-ended questions, they are closed-ended questions. So it will either there's a varied ways of answering these that we still consider qualitative. You can do it on a range of 0 to 5 or 1 to 10, where you put it in order or where you rate it. We do a lot of this on Google when you do reviews. People go on there and they give a rating of what they think where does it fall, and then that comes to be the number you're rating on Google, and people use that. They look up the ratings and say, ooh, this hotel looks better than that hotel because look at how the people rated it. Okay, and so we use those. It is quantitative because it's using numbers and they can average it. So it is quantitative, but it may not be the best way of doing it. Okay, but you can use this type of a scale. Oops. Scale rating. You can just have a number answer. How many children do you have? What is your age? What is your height? Those are all numbers, something we can measure, okay? And those are usually measurements, but not always, because like if I say how many siblings you have, I guess that's a child, it's a measurement in a way. Or how many kids do you have, that is a measurement, okay? Or it can be a yes or no question, that's closed-ended. Do you like vanilla ice cream?
Yeah.
That's a yes, okay? Yeses are given one value, nos are given another value, okay? That's how we can do it closed-ended. So it's given yeses equal 1, nos equals 0. And then you can come up with some statistical things in that. Okay, so we can do a lot of different ways to do these interviews, observation questionnaires. Okay, but those are some of the ways that we look at them. Okay, then the other way we can do it is we can go out and we can do, let's see. There's actual calculations. So instead of interviews, there's actual calculations. And the way you would collect that is basically if I say we have these tests that we gave everybody. Usually when you get ready to go to college, it's a SAT test. And the SAT test is recorded for everybody in the country. It doesn't say who individually got it, but we can look at those numbers and we can do calculations on them. Okay, it's the same thing with a company. You can do calculations on how much they sold each month or each quarter, and those are just calculations. So it's basically using numbers, using available numbers, and performing a calculation on them. So that the available numbers just kind of depend on where you're at and what you're doing. Okay. Countable numbers are another way when we count or we order numbers, like first place, second place, third place, fourth place. That's an ordinal number. It's in order. This was first, this was second, this was third. And what you can do when you do ordinal numbers is you can actually come up with, if I use an ordinal number to describe a various characteristic. So I give pine trees a 1, fir trees a 2. I'm looking at the species, that's why I came up with these. And a cedar tree is a 3. So if you just give them different numbers, those are called ordinal numbers. It's usually written as first, second. We can also do them as place values. We use these a lot. This football team is in first place. This football team's in second place. This football team's in third place. Okay, so that's another way we can use ordinal numbers. But it's really specifying a number based on either the order they came in a competition, or in an order that we specify that's kind of random, actually. Okay, but ordinal numbers, they don't include negatives, they don't include decimals. You cannot be in 1.5th place, 1.5th, 1.5 place. That doesn't work. Okay, so just think of them as 1, 2, 3. It's the counting numbers, but they're more specific. They're in order. That's where the word order. You see order in there? See that ord? That's really in there in ordinal numbers. Okay, and so sometimes you can figure out what words mean based on what's in there. It's part of that definition. Okay. So these are basically the two types. We are going to focus on this semester. We are going to focus on quantitative data and how we work with quantitative, which is good because almost every one of our things that we looked up was quantitative. So we need to look at now, how did they come up with those? How did they calculate those? What's the probability that that's really accurate? All those kind of things. So that's what we are going to be spending our time on, is looking at those quantitative numbers that we have and figuring out, okay, how did they come up with 20%? How accurate is that? We'll look about how do I go out, and we're going to talk about sampling versus a population. Those are things we have to know about. In fact, the next thing we're going to go into is a lot about research methods, because we have to know kind of what we need to do if we're going to do good research. Okay, and we'll talk about whether it's qualitative or quantitative, what you need to do to set up your good research methods. And that's something we'll start looking at. Okay, so if you haven't had a chance, actually you can take some time right now. You can go on, you can write or read this long thing. It goes into other things like discrete versus continuous. We'll get into that more. Just looking through all this, read through this, kind of get an overview of the two different types, qualitative and quantitative. This covers a ton of material. I mainly want you to know what is the difference right now, okay? How would you identify? And that will be something you're going to be doing this week, is you're going to go out and find some examples of qualitative data and quantitative data. So I want you to start looking to see if you can determine. I might give you some and ask you also, identify this as qualitative or quantitative. So there might be two different things in our discussion for Thursday and Friday. Okay, and give me a reason why you think it's qualitative or quantitative. Okay, and then if you guys differ, you should talk about it amongst yourselves to see why you differ. Okay, Abby might look and say, oh, Rose said that was quantitative, I think it's qualitative. These are my reasons. And then you're going to make a comment to her, okay, can you explain this a little more, or I'm reading this, and that kind of stuff. Yeah, so okay, so spend some time reading through the material right now. Okay, it's very long. Or if you want to, you can start looking up some examples of qualitative and quantitative right now. So up to you what you want to do at this point.